and welcome back to Migration Season 3, Episode 2. Today we are talking about depression and anxiety and how it relates to this perspective of non-localized consciousness, which is, of course, the star of the show here. And I'm going to say something right up front about depression and anxiety. We are only starting to wake up to this notion that these things are something that only some people suffer from, and that is absolute total nonsense. Suffering from these emotional states of darkness and hopelessness is something everyone must experience on some level, unless you have mastered the techniques and the worldview I'm pointing to here. I mean, yeah, if you live in a 24/7 state of awareness that is completely unidentified with the internal dialogue and the context we live our lives through, the matrix as some refer to it, then maybe this doesn't quite apply to you. But as for the rest of us, it's simply a matter of degree of how much you suffer from it, how much you allow yourself to be aware of your anxiety. We're getting very good at distracting ourselves from what is present. Now, we can experience depression and anxiety for two basic reasons. The first is when there's a really good reason to feel stressed out and depressed. And the second one is when there is no reason to feel stressed out and depressed. That's right, we can feel anxious about our work, our relationships, our money, or lack thereof. A real life stressful event that we are worried about, and we can feel anxious on a lazy Sunday afternoon, or when we're even on vacation, when we've theoretically taken a break from all of our problems. This fact alone demands that we look at these dark emotions from a brand new perspective. And that's what we're going to flush out today. So get comfortable, smoke them if you got them, and get ready for today's episode of Migration. So some of you have noticed that you can become more anxious even when you're in a state of relaxed or expanded awareness. After meditating, after maybe smoking some marijuana or having a few drinks, even the strongest opiate on the planet can't completely extinguish anxiety all by itself. Trust me, I've tried. Stress can rise when you're trying, even just trying to go to sleep, or even in the middle of a yoga class. So what's going on here? This very path I'm pointing to, this way to escape the matrix of the limiting context you live your life through, it's going to open your eyes along the way to some very difficult realities, and most importantly, you'll become more and more aware of how, regardless of the specific stressful situation at hand, you sense that something at the heart of your experience isn't right somehow. You often feel that you live with a sense of being trapped. It can get you asking, why, oh why didn't I take the blue pill? Becoming aware is a path most choose to run in the other direction from. They sense how it's going to tear their world apart. It takes incredible courage to follow this particular path we're talking about here. And it's been proven over and over. More often than not, those of us who suffer the most from depression actually have a very solid grasp of reality. Not a perfect grasp, mind you, but a really good one. In a way, what I represent is simply someone who has repeatedly observed this world naked, stripped of all of its narrative, beyond the limiting cage of context, and now I'm beyond fortunate to know how to get back there, to a zone that depression and anxiety can't touch whenever I wish to, and it is pure bliss. I live now in a state of beauty I would have envied myself just 10 years ago. Even if you don't live in 24/7 bliss and beauty, that ability to know how to tap back into pure consciousness alone will change your life. And it's scary to live beyond the cage of context and meaning. You can feel vulnerable without your story at first, but the trouble you'll go through to wake up, you're going to find is 1000% worth it. There is a real state our consciousness can exist in without the suffering and stress that we're enduring. There's something we can do about it beyond distracting ourselves and dulling our attention with alcohol or media or the billions of other addictions out there. And that's coming from a former opium and media addict. My own life has been a steady progression away from high stress, anxiety, and depression. I would say that I was a fairly nervous kid who grew into a rather anxious young man, and I learned how to stab anxiety in the heart. And although I will, it'll come back over and over wearing a different mask each time, if you know the secret to diffuse it, it will have less sway over you each time it rears its head. Believe it or not, even as you just sit there and watch this video, on some level you are experiencing at least a subtle sense of background anxiety right now, or what you might label as a subtle depression, if not a major one. And I'm talking about all of these sensations, whatever you might call them, a sense of feeling anxious or sad, on edge, worried, or depressed. All of those labels are pointing to sensations that may have a slightly different flavor, a different energy to them, you might say, but they all have the same solution to them in the end, because what we're ultimately going to do here is extinguish our suffering to depression, the reaction we have in the face of it. So right now, I want you to just take a moment, and I just want you to try to zero in on that sensation just for a moment. You're not going to do anything about it right now. We're not going to visualize sending chi to it, or healing energy, or imagine flushing away the sensation, or anything else like that. Just take a look at it for a moment. We're so over-focused on problem solving that we often forget to just observe what we're facing. Your pure observation alone is where all that imagery of healing energy is actually born. Now, when we look at this sensation we call depression or anxiety, we have to make sure we're looking at the sensation itself, not the story that it's spinning for you. This is so important. We need to learn that we have the ability to isolate all of our raw emotions from the narratives they weave for us. In the case of anxiety, there is this uneasy sense of friction and an irritating tickle just under the surface of being that doesn't seem to ever go away, but when we look at it, we usually immediately connect that sensation to something that's going on in our life, some unresolved issue, something that we sense has been left undone, unfinished, often something completely out of our control. And I'm going to be very honest with you, that very first step is very difficult. This is really tough stuff. I'm asking you to isolate your reaction from something that may be pointing to something truly awful or heartbreaking, a serious threat to your security or your health. A loved one is sick or in pain, and there's nothing you can do about it. We're not dealing with that right now. And when you do this practice, that is what you have to resolve with yourself. You have to make an agreement. Right now, I'm not going to solve that stressful, depressing story in my life. Just for right now, I'm going to deal with a different aspect of this dynamic that I'm suffering from. In this culture, we hail from a long lineage that has one way or another preached to us that if you aren't suffering from it, you must not really care about it. And that's not just a toxic ideology, it's also an ideology that's completely wrong. And right here is what keeps anxiety as a never-ending cycle in our life. We imagine to ourselves, if I could just solve that one issue in my life, then that irritating sensation that I'm dealing with will go away, and then I'll be at peace. It sounds logical, doesn't it? This problem I'm thinking about is like a splinter in my finger, so, when I pull it out, everything's going to be fine. But those of you who have really been paying attention to the flow of your life, who are starting to pick up some real wisdom, you know that this is also true. You must admit that you've experienced all kinds of stress and anxiety over 1,001 issues that have indeed been resolved, and yet somehow that sense of unease just pops up again, wearing a brand new mask. Once you cut off one head, another one pops up right back up in its place. That waiting line sometimes is infinite. You solve one problem and there's always another waiting in line right behind it. And that is the honest truth that you have to come face to face with first and foremost, that waiting line is never ending. There is a never ending line of stories that are waiting to convince you that they are why you feel uneasy, slightly off balance, like there is something left undone. Believe me, I get it. Once you start becoming aware of all the horrible, deeply sad, unjust things that have, can, and do happen in this world, we tell ourselves, I can't possibly be at peace while this situation is at hand. I won't let myself be at peace while this is happening. It would be morally wrong for me to be at peace while this is happening. The absolute truth is that this world needs more people who allow themselves to remain at peace within their own bliss, at full centered contentment in the middle of terror and chaos. We are the healers of the world, and I won't lie, it is not easy. We're not in the majority, but luckily for us, we don't have to be. We carry something far more powerful than just numbers. The truth is, no matter how much money you obtain, how much strength or power you win in this life, how popular you are, how much you go to church, or how much chi you manage to acquire, it ultimately doesn't matter. Even if you find a way to solve all of your financial issues and have nothing else to do but lay on the beach all day, the stories about why you aren't at peace, why you're not totally happy, why you feel anxious will adapt themselves to whatever station you manage to rise to whatever new context you find yourself in. And that right there is the point. As long as you are identified with any context, no matter how awesome it may appear, you will suffer in the cage of it. No matter where you go, your stories are going to follow you. Have you ever been on vacation and you realize you're still a bit on edge, and you actually find yourself, searching your brain to actually find an adequate reason to feel this anxious? We prefer to have a neat and tidy target to point at, the villain responsible, so that we don't have to consider what's actually going on here. Stop trying to break out of the matrix by resolving not to be at peace until you solve that one really important problem. That's how it keeps you trapped and in a loop. You have to start saying, stop. It stops here with me right now. As I discussed in the episode Walking in Stillness, there is a subtle resistance in your mind all of the time, a sort of pushback to being completely centered within yourself. Even on a biological level, the very definition of life is to exist in a state of imbalance. The very machine you're piloting doesn't reach total equilibrium until it's flatlined. Unbalance is sort of built into us on a biological level. So the point is that you're just shit out of luck. You're screwed. Sorry. Thanks for watching. Sorry it all had to end this way. Sorry. I'm kidding. I always give you the bad news first. That's how some of this goes. That's because the bad news is never the last word on the subject. Here's the good news. Your peace, your bliss, and realizing your direct connection to power has nothing to do with that infinite waiting line of never-ending stories. In fact, when you fully understand this dynamic I'm pointing to, you're going to find that you can tackle those problems far more effectively without the sense of anxiety always droning on in the background of your mind. Stress and anxiety and depression makes us generally very inefficient creatures, and it's only when you've pulled back from these stories that you can really see what you can and what you actually should do about any of them. Oh, but I work better under pressure. How many times have you heard that? Maybe even coming out of your own mouth. I used to say that all the time, and it's bullshit. You avoid work until it's breathing down your neck, and then, overwhelming anxiety scares the crap out of you, and then you take furious action on it. The brain acts with tunnel vision when it's under stress. And yeah, that was great for escaping predators. That response has served us well for 99% of our time on this planet, but we're evolving. We are migrating. That response is not great for complex problem solving and reflection and finding true peace and insight. There is a better way. There is a more efficient way. Again, the reason the sensation of anxiety never dies is because we keep battling the stories it masks itself with. It's like fighting a monster that keeps tossing a hologram of itself in front of it, and we spend all our energy battling that hologram when none of our blows ever land on the beast itself. It's a brilliant trick, and it's really very effective. Why is it very effective? Because it's a trick that we generally don't realize we're playing on ourselves, and that trick works on us on so many levels. Most of us walk through life thinking that who we are is the mask of identity and personality, of ego that we wear. As long as you still believe you are your mask, you'll continue to be tricked by anyone and anything else you interact with, also wearing a disguise. The very concept of Maya in the Hindu traditions reminds us that the entire world wears a mask or a veil that hides us from the deeper interconnectedness of everything. And as I keep reminding everyone, a growing number of modern physicists tell us that it really does appear we're living in some kind of a simulation where everything around us is closer to the nature of a hologram. And I agree, that is also my experience. But it's powered by us on levels we are normally not conscious of. So what I'm saying is we need to attack anxiety and depression at its source, and that requires looking past the scenario the sensation is pointing to and staring the monster directly in the eye. We need to be willing to observe the sensation of anxiety itself, sit with it, let it in. And I literally do mean sit down for a moment and bring your awareness to the raw sensation of this anxiety. If you are becoming more skilled at lucid dreaming, if you can pull this practice into a conscious dream state, it will be 100 times more effective. But that's not necessary. If you're not a lucid dreamer, you can do these practices in a meditative state as well. So let's start with the basics. Right now, what part of your body do you feel this sensation is sprouting from? Is it in your stomach? Is it in your chest? Is it in your head? Let's say you feel it in your chest. So go there. Breathe and feel that anxiety, that sensation. Not the story the sensation is connected to. You're on break right now. Give yourself 5 minutes. Say, for the next 5 minutes, I'm off duty. I'm not going to solve that stressful problem for 5 minutes. Relax. It'll still be there when you come back, I promise. Pay attention to what the sensation feels like. You don't have to do anything with it. All you're doing is examining it and not following any narrative it tries to throw at you. You'll find yourself going down a path of, oh, well, I can't help but feel like shit. I'm really worried about how this event might turn out, yada, yada, yada. That's okay. You win every time you realize that you're caught up in an inner storyline again. So don't get frustrated. These practices I share with you on this series, they can be difficult, possibly some of the hardest obstacles you'll ever face in your life. It's okay to be self-conscious. Being self-conscious has been given such a bad name. Isn't it funny that the very idea of being self-conscious in our society is directly associated with being nervous and stressed out and awkward? As we touched on earlier, we wonder how we can feel more anxious when we are in a position where we let our guard down while we're meditating, while we're on vacation. And yeah, people who say, things like, pot makes me paranoid. No, it doesn't. Not any more than trying to fall asleep makes you suddenly nervous, which is why insomnia is a growing epidemic in our culture. When you start to relax, that's when you start to see that giant line of unfinished business. The brain is a problem-solving machine. It doesn't even know what to do with itself when there isn't a problem to solve. Move your attention away from the obsessive problem solving and onto the sensation of stress and depression itself. You have to learn to not be afraid to allow yourself to be aware at the center of that sensation of anxiety. Sit right in the middle of it and just pay attention. Healing takes place from there all on its own. It might feel bottomless at first. It's not. In fact, what you're going to eventually find is that the sensation of depression starts becoming slippery the more you merge with it. You'll start going, wait, where did it go? I was just zeroing in on that low sinking feeling or that tightening, twisting, buzzing energy in my gut, and now I can't seem to find it. So what's happening there? Depression itself, what we are pointing to when we say, I feel depressed, I feel anxious, that is the actual sensation that you are suffering over, is ultimately unreal. That does not mean the sensation in your life you are currently attaching to it isn't real, although it's a good thing to make sure you're not just imagining the worst outcome to something when in fact you have no idea how something is going to turn out in your life. When I look back over all of my anxieties throughout my existence, all the things I worried about so much ended up being, never being worth the suffering I put myself through. The flavor of depression itself is nothing without its mask. It's the Wizard of Oz, the big scary thing that keeps threatening you, but when the curtain's pulled aside, that is, when we refuse to indulge in the story it's trying to latch itself to about how worried we should be about some event, it's this tiny, sad little thing that shrivels up to nothing, a whisper of what we imagined it was. The more you see this, the greater control you acquire over your life. Not just your inner state of mind and emotions, your life. And when you do that, you are in a far better position to effectively deal with that line of issues at hand. You'll approach them with clarity and, most importantly, without any fear. Now, this is not something that you can just do once. You're going to have to return to this centered, face-to-face observation of your darker emotions over and over again. That's okay. I promise this will get easier eventually. When that sensation isn't distorting your perception, you're going to find that you start becoming very clear about just what these undone, unfinished scenarios truly are. You're going to find that once you pull apart your anxiety like this, 99% of what is in this waiting line of stories is a "but what if" scenario. As we discuss in much deeper detail in the book, this is what the brain is wired to do, and we can really beat ourselves up over this. We often have this running story that's lying to us, saying, well, if you were just more worked up over this, or if you just worked harder, or if you were smarter about the situation, or if you really just cared more, if you were really just stressed out, more about the situation, then and only then could you fix everything. I used to really believe that if I wasn't anxious about an important situation, that I'd just lay on the couch all day and never do anything about it. And that is a total lie. People who truly are at peace and content don't sit on a couch all day. Anxious people sit on a couch all day. But often we're not going to see the truth behind how we problem solve until we've dropped our fears of looking at the entire situation as a whole. And the majority of us can never see the full picture because we're too busy fighting those stories, obsessed over trying to extinguish this terrible feeling of anxiety. If you keep meditating on your stress and depression like this, you're going to find a truly deep peace underneath this ultimately meaningless sensation you've labeled as anxiety or depression. Once you know how to dissolve this obstacle of nervousness or sadness or heaviness or feeling twisted up in knots, you'll realize that supreme bliss and peace has always been hiding behind those doors. There is a consequence to having this kind of brains that we've evolved with. And we are simultaneously the most powerful creatures that, as far as we know, have ever walked on this planet, but we're also the most fragile. There's something about us that can look at this view, the raw force of nature, and somehow see both the beauty of it and also the horrors. It's amazing until doubt starts rising up and we think about all the creepy, crawling things that might be hiding beneath that foliage. And so we felt more comfortable with this. All that we humans have built came from our brain first. All this desire for so-called control over chaos started within us. We didn't start by paving over the grass. We started paving over our minds, turning every jagged edge into neat parallel lines. And we're suffering from that as modern humans. Some say that depression and psychosis was practically unheard of in tribal cultures, that aren't in a constant fight with their environment. So it's all about becoming more and more comfortable with that chaos that lives within you, because there is an imbalance that it seems that we all have as modern humans. We have some sort of need to feel that everything is perfectly in control, moving in perfectly straight, scripted lines, while when we do that, we miss out on all of our more raw nature, the parts of us that seem out of control, that seem chaotic. And there's a real balance that we can find with all of those parts of ourselves that have been sort of swept under the rug. So that is my suggestion when you are dealing with these darker emotions, depression, anxiety. Look them in the eye. Don't be afraid to stare the monsters right in the face. So until next time, thanks so much. Please like and subscribe. That really does help out this channel. And check out the book that this entire series is based on. That really does help keep this show moving forward. So thanks so much. Until next time, peace be with you. Take care. And welcome back to Migration, Season 3, Episode 2. Today we are talking about depression and anxiety, and that is, a bad thing. Stress actually makes us terribly inefficient. It's totally a word. Go look it up. I just invented it. Inefficient. I'm so smart.